In remembrance, we ask Almighty God to watch over our nation and grant us patience and resolve in all that is to come. As we've been assured, neither death
on the front lines in the search for survivors, rescuers digging through a mountain of destruction.
Handshaking and backslapping, President Bush tours the ruins of Lower Manhattan and vows the attackers will hear all of us soon.
And the flicker of candles illuminates Central Park, Americans gathering to share their grief.
Hello, you're watching CNN's continuing coverage of America's new war. I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center.
And I'm Jim Clancy. We're going to begin our report with the latest developments in the aftermath of Tuesday's catastrophe. Well, down in a canyon of mud and rubble, the search for any signs of life and for the dead goes on at Ground Zero. Workers are inspecting tons of debris left from the collapse of the World Trade Center towers. Anything that could be evidence is being sent to a joint terrorist task force. At the Pennsylvania crash site, an encouraging word. Just hours ago, searchers found the cockpit voice recorder from the hijacked United 757. Authorities in Washington will study that recorder to see what it reveals about the final minutes before impact. President George Bush left New York after meeting with rescue workers. Authorities made their first arrest in connection with the hijackings. It is a man they say is a material witness, taken into custody at John F. Kennedy Airport. While in Congress, the House has joined the Senate in passing a resolution that authorizes the president to use all necessary force in retaliation for the attacks. Mr. Bush, meantime, says the search goes on for the mastermind behind the plot.
We're gathering all the possible evidence. At the appropriate time, we will let America know what the evidence is.
Do you feel like you know who did it?
We know we got a suspect.
Well, in New York, these are moments to mourn and moments to remember, but not yet a time to give up hope. While workers sift through those still smoking ruins, survivors and loved ones keep a vigil for the more than 4,700 people who are missing at this point. And keeping it all in perspective for us is Garrick Utley. He is in New York and joins us now. Garrick?
Good morning, Colleen. Well, given all that's transpired in New York City, particularly in Manhattan this week, New Yorkers can be grateful for small blessings. And one of those small blessings was not just that President Bush came here, but even more important than that from a New Yorker perspective is how he came here. Usually a president visits New York City, lands at JFK, big presidential motorcade comes in, snarls up traffic, New Yorkers and their cars fume. There's not much we can do about it. This time, though, because of security reasons, the plans were different. The president landed in Air Force Base outside of New York, helicoptered in, caused very little disruption in life here. There's been enough disruption, as we know, since Tuesday. And he visited the rescue operation down there in Lower Manhattan, where you have some pictures of that. The president was there talking with firemen, all the other rescue participants. The mayor, the governor was there. And then this really what turned into an extraordinary communing with the workers. And there are about 1,000 workers at any given time there on the site. He had this to say.
I want you all to know that America today is on bended knee in prayer for the people whose lives were lost here, for the workers who work here, for the families who mourn. This nation stands with the good people of New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut as we mourn the loss of thousands of our citizens. I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
The atmosphere, as you can see there, was quite warm and emotional, although the weather has turned cooler. The first few days it was summerish here in New York City. That helped the workers down there. But now we've had rainstorms, and autumn is in the air, and Alessio Vinci is there on location. Alessio?
Well, good evening, Garrick. Well, there was rain yesterday, and today it's very cold, bitterly cold, I would say. And we have reported many incredible stories in the past few days since those two jetliners crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. And what we're seeing now behind me is perhaps one of those incredible stories. As you can see from these live pictures that we're providing to you now, there's still smoke rising on top of that pile of rubble. Almost 4 days, as I said, after the crash. The rescue operation is continuing on a 24-hour operation. There was a brief interruption today and earlier yesterday due to the rain, but now the rescue workers are back at work on their 12-hour shift. The weather, as I said, is very cold. The rain yesterday making the site a little bit more slippery and more dangerous for the rescue workers. But as I said, now it's been dry for the last 12 hours or so. So the operation is continuing quite speedily. Chances to find somebody alive at this time are growing dim, as people will begin to speak about any kind of miracle if anybody is found alive underneath that rubble. However, there are still 4,717 people missing, and the rescue workers with whom we'll be able to speak earlier today must believe that somebody underneath that pile of rubble still must be alive. The latest numbers, however, speak for themselves. 185 people have been found dead. 408 body parts so far, and Mayor Rudolph Giuliani saying yesterday that he still was hopeful that some survivors could have been found. However, some of the engineers there on site also saying that it was quite possible that many of those 4,000 people still missing, their bodies will never be found, because when the jet crashed into those two towers, of course they were loaded with a lot of fuel. The fire was extremely intense, and many of those bodies were burned completely. More than 13,000 tons of debris has been recovered from the site. They've been mainly taken to Staten Island. There, the FBI is sifting through the debris and trying to get any kind of clues from the debris to find out if perhaps any of those evidence of who the hijackers may be. We have a list of names, but perhaps in that debris, the FBI can find some more clues. Back to you, Garrick.
Yes, Alessio, it's a rather sensitive point, of course. You touched on it, though, and I think we should follow up on it. The rescue workers there, they're not finding survivors. They don't really believe they're going to find survivors, but still city officials aren't saying that all hope is lost. But tell us a bit about the atmosphere and what you're hearing from those workers there. I mean, do they hold out any hope still?
They did not give up on hope, especially because they can hear on television, perhaps, or on the radio every day, that the people up at the Armory are still hoping to be able to find their people alive, and therefore the rescue workers here perhaps believe that it is up to them to meet some of those hopes and see if perhaps somebody in an air pocket or perhaps underneath a large piece of concrete may still be alive. And also, Garrick, it's important to know that underneath that rubble there are still 300 firemen, 30 police officers, 30 Port Authority officers. These are all people who are some of the people who are there knew. There were some friends, some comrades, and therefore perhaps that particular element also is giving the rescue operation here and then another boost in trying to find perhaps one of their comrades still alive. So there is still not only the fact to find people who are working in there, but also some of their comrades who rushed into the building soon after the plane crashed into it before it collapsed.
Thank you very much, Alessio. Certainly a very strong, motivating force to keep on digging, keep on working. Back now to Jim and Colleen in Atlanta.
All right, Garrick, thank you for that. Well, moving now from rescue and recovery toward retaliation, something that may also be in the future a sure sign of America's resolve. President Bush authorizing the Defense Department to call up as many as 50,000 military reservists for homeland defense. With the latest from the Pentagon, now we're joined by Mark Potter live. Mark?
Well, there are a couple of issues going on here at the Pentagon. There is the reserve call-up, and there is taking care of the Pentagon building itself. About a third of the complex remains closed after being hit by the hijacked jetliner on Thursday. Intense flames and smoke and water contributed to the extensive damage to the area, which ironically had just finished being renovated. Now, officials estimate it could take several years to rebuild this area, and could cost anywhere between $100 million and $1 billion to do that. Now, as we can see here in this live picture, the workers continue to pour through the building to sift through the rubble. They're still trying to find victims. They're trying to shore up the building so that they can work more safely there. The safety is an extreme consideration here. There are some very dangerous conditions. Occasionally fires break out also. They are also looking for evidence to help the FBI with its criminal case. The estimated death toll now stands at 189. That's 125 Pentagon personnel and about 64 passengers from the American Airlines jet. Now, today the Pentagon is putting together plans for the activation of the reservists that you were talking about, some 35,000 reservists. The military says it will first ask for volunteers, and it already seems that there are a lot of those.
We've had people who are knocking on the doors seeking to help. They want to serve. They want to be a part of this. They're very emotional. We've had to say, wait a little bit. You know, we've only had a matter of hours since this all began. We're proceeding along our way, and now we have the authorization to bring those people on board.
The reservists will be used to help with the disaster relief efforts, and also to support the National Guard pilots who have been seen particularly over the skies of in the skies over Washington, D.C. and New York, flying the combat air patrols, as we can see here. They are also on standby, a 15-minute standby at a number of bases around the country. This call-up would involve also the Coast Guard reservists, who would be involved in shoring up the defenses along the nation's at the nation's seaports. The call-up will begin in the next few days, and we will see people leaving their families and their civilian jobs. Among those who are likely to be activated, engineers, doctors, military police, air defense, and intelligence specialists, and chaplains. Jim, back to you.
All right, Mark Potter reporting there live from the Pentagon. Well, from coast to coast on Friday, Americans paused. They paused to mourn. The National Day of Prayer and Remembrance inspired candlelight vigils for the victims and their families.
I have come from you, the God of my salvation.
In Providence, Rhode Island, thousands of people went to the State House to hold candles in memory of those who lost their lives. They listened to state leaders speak about the need to unite as a nation. In Boston, some 3,000 people set candles afloat in a reflecting pool beside a church as the Boston Symphony Orchestra played hymns and patriotic songs. And in Denver, Colorado, the Mile High City, people held candles in Washington Park just as dusk began to fall across the Rockies. New arrivals at the vigil lit their candles from those held by mourners already there. On the West Coast, in Seattle, Washington, thousands of candles flickered on the harbor steps across the Seattle Art Museum. Just a few of many such ceremonies held all across the United States. Colleen?
And Jim, people gathered in churches, synagogues, and mosques around the country as well to remember the victims. The National Cathedral in Washington was the site of a solemn and quite an emotional midday prayer service. Past presidents, current leaders all attended this service. In a display of America's religious diversity, Prayers at the cathedral were offered by Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, and Muslim clergy. One of the country's preeminent religious figures, the Reverend Billy Graham, gave this sermon.
Yes, our nation has been attacked, buildings destroyed.